Guardians of the Galaxy. Here we are. This is the first Marvel movie we will be talking about that I can actually say is good and has very little flaws and is an actual good, well-made movie. Not great, good. Like, The Avengers was close, but if it had been shot not like a terrible-looking TV movie and had the dialogue been punched up a little bit, would have been a better movie. But Guardians of the Galaxy is that movie. First of all, we got James Gunn. James Gunn is a director that has a style and a flair, and he knows how to make a really good, weird, colorful movie that is insanely weird, but also is insanely likable. First of all, we have the music in this movie. Let's talk about that, because that is my favorite part of this movie. Not just because, I like the time period that the songs come from. I like the music, right? No, it's actually because it fits the movie. So I go on YouTube a lot, and there are a lot of songs actually on YouTube from 70s, 60s eras that are out of print. You cannot buy CDs or albums of them or them digitally. So I listen to them on YouTube. And what you'll find is when people hear those types of 70s, 60s music, they will say, I want this in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I always comment back to these people, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Because it seems to me that a lot of the people who like the soundtracks to these movies don't understand that the music is actually chosen because it fits the moment in the scenes, not because, and some of them actually match up lyrically to what is happening in the movie. So it's not James Gunn listening to a good song going, man, I want that in my Guardians of the Galaxy movie. No, it's not. That's not what he wants. That's not the point of why the music's here. First of all, it's supposed to set the goofy tone, which it does. We see the first shot of this movie, Peter Quill, his mom's dying and he refuses to touch his mom, and then they play the song 10cc or by 10cc, Not in Love, which is a song about denying feelings, which is what Peter does throughout the entire movie. It's the entire point of his character and how he learns and grows throughout these movies. That's, lyrically it matches up with the movie, right? And that's a great part of the soundtrack. Another element about the soundtrack people don't forget about, people say Marvel scores aren't very good. And I agree with that, except for one. This one. Tyler Bates' Guardians of the Galaxy score is actually pretty good. It's not the most memorable thing, but it actually sounds pretty good and fits the movie pretty well. So, that's pretty great. And then you also have the effects in this movie. The effects in this movie have little issues. They blend practical and real effects, and they also use effects pretty well. The characters are all likable, and it's also just the humor here is really good and is barely interrupts the scenes that they fit in. The only part where this movie really fails is where all Marvel movies fail, which is the villain. Ronan is a bad character. He could be interesting. We have a character who sees the mess that Thanos is more than our last character who dealt with Thanos, Loki, and he's in this movie and he's rising against Thanos. And that could be interesting, but they don't do anything with that. He just kind of up and dies, and he came back in like Captain Marvel. And when I was hearing that, I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Bringing back a classic character, maybe give him a little bit more depth, but they don't do anything with that either. Ronan is a character who has no depth. He's just a one-note, boring, bad guy. He looks boring. He's not interesting, and so he's worse than any of these other Marvel guys, besides, I guess, Malekith from Thor 2 or whatever. But it's just no. And that's the only part where this movie really fails, besides, I guess, sometimes the humor getting in the way, but that's so little compared to all these other Marvel movies. And this movie's insanely goofy compared to those. So I guess it works out fine enough. And all the acting, pretty good. It all works together, and it makes a really fun movie. Now the story is a little cliche. You have a bunch of guys who all kind of have their differences and they all have to kind of work together to save the day. Kind of a story we've heard a million times, but it works because they're introducing characters that no one has ever heard of or seen before. I remember when the trailers came out for this movie, people were like, what? I mean, the trailer was John C. Reilly going over who all the characters are, and then the one guy going, and then they all getting locked up in prison. It's like, what? Nobody knew what this movie was going to be. Nobody expected it to be a hit, but it was. And I know it's a cliche to say this movie was a huge risk, and Marvel took such a huge risk. But in some ways they did. I don't think it's as big as a risk people made it out to be, because it's just the fact of, if you make a good, well-made, entertaining movie, then people will like it and like the characters within that movie. That's all they needed to do. It's not that hard to figure out. It's not that big of a risk. Just make a good movie. And it is kind of interesting how well it worked out, but it just goes back to the simple fact. You make a good movie, people will like the characters within that good movie, and then, it just works. But yeah, fun movie, and great movie, and it does a lot. I mean, just such a good movie. But I think I think this is the one Marvel movie where I can actually say this is a good movie. Not a great movie, a good movie.